Sounds True presents The Jewel Tree of Tibet, Session 4 with Robert Thurman.
Welcome back to the wish-granting gem tree field. Let's meditate for a minute together. Sit in a balanced way, breathe gently. Let your ordinary reality, not only your sense of body and location, but the cosmos, continent, planet, era, let it all dissolve. Don't think about anything. Feel that you're just a vast empty space, floating there nicely, no division of self and other, no worries, just pure, sheer, lucid voidness, vast space of freedom itself. And then arise from that, suddenly in your most alert, perky, luminous form, your meditative self, on the roof of the world, on a bluff overlooking Lake Manasarovar, with an island in the middle of the lake, out of it growing a giant tree, made of jewels, agate, and coral, and diamond, and emerald, and ruby, and sapphire, and topaz. Lights radiating everywhere, its crown in the heavens, with fluffy clouds. And on the branches of the tree, instead of the Christmas ornaments, are the glistening lotuses. And on the buds of the lotuses sit the holy mentors, the enlightened beings, the great teachers, the saints, the saviors, the goddesses, the gods, your whole pantheon of enlightened beings, sitting and looking down at you, happily blessing you, radiating light rays to you. You fill up with the light rays, you glow and you're energized with them. Your self-doubt and your self-limitation and your self-defeating attitudes melting away, flowing out from you. And then you become so glowing with light that the light reflects around you to all the beings sitting around you on the green sward, who don't know to look at the tree. They don't see the tree, they just see an empty lake. So they're looking at you, wonder what you're looking at and why it is that you're starting to glow and you hum and you're levitating there in your energy field, feeling so good. And then forget about the visualization, just let it be there. You're in that field, filled up with these rainbow jewel light rays. Then you salute them, hail, enlightened ones, thank you for coming. Please bless me to realize the teachings. Sustain me, bless all beings to realize the teachings. Bless me to help them realize the teachings. Then offering, radiate the whole world to them. Pick up the planet in your hands. Hold it out to them. Say, here, you take the world. We're messing it up, polluting it, messing with the ozone, filling it with too many people, destroying too many species. You take it. Have the universe. And have the relief and the burden of putting the responsibility for the universe on the enlightened beings. Then think about your own actions, your negative actions of taking lives, taking what is not given, sexual misconduct, telling lies, making divisions between people, speaking harshly, speaking frivolously, meaninglessly, holding greedy thoughts, holding malicious thoughts, holding unrealistic attitudes. Those 10 negative acts, you think about whatever I did of them, all my different lives. I sincerely repent. I'm sorry I wronged you, oh, and mentor beings, 3 jewels, enlightened beings. I didn't live up to your standard. Ordinary living beings, I'm sorry I wronged you, I harmed you, I misled you, I failed to attain enlightenment to help you. I'm really sorry I did that. I won't do it anymore. I'm going to do the opposite sort of virtuous, wonderful things. I'm going to save lives. I'm going to give gifts. I'm going to be sexually correct and helpful and sensitive. I'm going to tell the truth. I'm going to speak reconcilingly, peacemakingly. I'm going to speak sweetly. I'm going to speak meaningfully. I'm going to hold generous thoughts and detached thoughts. I'm going to hold loving thoughts and patient thoughts. I'm going to hold realistic views of the cause and effect of evolution, of the transformation of enlightenment, of the 12 links of dependent origination, the process of causation of the universe, of the 4 noble truths. Then next I'm going to rejoice in front of you, all mentor beings. Let us rejoice in all the good deeds of all beings throughout the universe. Let us not feel a drop of envy, of competitiveness, of contempt, but let us sincerely congratulate every single one from depth of heart and rejoice with their good deeds and well-being. Then, O enlightened ones, please bring your teaching, make the Dharma reign of teaching of enlightenment upon me and upon all beings, so that we can gain the understanding to be free of suffering and the cause of suffering, to achieve happiness and the cause of happiness. And then, O enlightened ones, don't go be transcendent and drop out and float there in the truth body, be sort of beyond and aloof. Don't just stick to your great bliss void vision, but see us specifically in our relativity and our suffering. Help us, stay with us forever. And finally, anything we do that's good here, let us dedicate it, not for personal fame or profit or gain, but for Buddhahood, total enlightenment for the sake of the happiness of all beings. So those are the 7 limbs we do, connecting ourselves within the refuge field. Then we turn our mind to the 4 themes within the arpeggio that reinforce our feeling of transcendence, our feeling of true self-appreciation, our feeling of wanting to drop out from the rat race of the world and be on vacation, spiritual quest, retreat, lifelong, mentally, by achieving transcendent abandon. And these are the themes of the preciousness of the human life that we have endowed with liberty and opportunity. The theme of the immediacy of death. Each moment is infinite. Each moment has infinite blessing. The theme of the inexorability of causal connection, of the infinite continuity of life, and the specific shaping of positive and negative experiences in life based on positive and negative evolutionary actions. And the fourth tone about suffering, the universal suffering about every aspect of egocentric existence, even being a form realm deity in the bliss heaven of Brahma, even being a formless realm deity in the absolute quiescence of infinite space, infinite consciousness, infinite nothingness, apparent nothingness, and beyond consciousness and unconsciousness, the fourth state, still being in those states, even as a deity of those states, living billions of aeons in those states, still suffering because it's still a temporary state, it's still created, therefore is destroyed eventually. These four themes then liberate us from any kind of ambition for anything short of total enlightenment, total liberation, total freedom. No mundane state of power or pleasure or even knowledge is worthwhile. Nothing about the egocentric life cycle is satisfactory. And when we realize these four, preciousness of life, immediacy of death, infinity of causation, suffering of egocentric life cycle, we achieve mental transcendence. We feel tremendous relief. We excuse ourselves from all kinds of boring, routine duties and obligations, and we focus upon the true meaning of our life, which is to attain perfect freedom and perfect awareness, perfect enlightenment. And then we come to the theme of the third session, which we quickly do as well. The theme that we are interconnected with all beings, that just as we feel relief to achieve liberation and freedom, so all beings need that relief. And in fact, since we are indelibly interconnected with them, until they also have the relief, our relief will not be absolutely perfect. And so in that line we'd resolve to conceive the spirit of enlightenment, cultivate the spirit of enlightenment, develop the spirit of enlightenment, whatever you say, plant the spirit of enlightenment in our mind stream, evolutionary stream. And there we take the 11-step process. We create the ground of equanimity, a sense of equal dedication and commitment and connection to all beings, with no preferences, no special enemies and no special friends. Upon that ground, then, we recognize all beings as having been our mothers in the infinite life. Upon that sense of kinship and familiarity, we remember the kindness of the mother of this life and therefore all the mothers of all the lives. Upon that sense of deep affection, deep appreciation for the mothers, we then develop a feeling of gratitude and wish to repay their kindness by making them truly happy. Upon that we move then to the fifth thing of deciding to exchange self and others, to give up our self-preoccupation and to adopt the preoccupation with others, adopt all of them as our children in a way, be the mother of all of them. And then moving to the next one, we then recognize the disadvantages. In fact, we reinforce that resolve to exchange self and others, both being equal, self and others being equal, and that each one seeks happiness and seeks to avoid suffering. And we then think of the disadvantages of maintaining self-preoccupation, how it has gotten us into trouble and kept us in an unsatisfactory state since beginning this time. We then move to the next step and we recognize the advantages of cherishing others, how all of them are dear to us. They are the jewel mine of our potential virtue, of our own Buddhahood. Without them, we couldn't become Buddhas and have the perfect bliss. And then we move to the next state where we feel totally loving towards all of them. We see them in their happiness. We visualize their happiness. We determine that they should have happiness in the cause of happiness. We then realistically appraise their condition of suffering, and we develop great compassion for them. We wish them to become free of that suffering and the cause of that suffering. And then the 10th stage, we realize that we must take responsibility for them. We develop the magnificent messianic resolve that we'll be that one more Buddha in the universe that will see to it that all of the beings we are aware of in the universe achieve freedom from suffering, permanent and total fulfillment of enlightenment. And then the 11th step is where we recognize that all other beings, many other beings, infinite numbers of other beings have become Buddhas already. They're doing the utmost that they can for all beings, and that therefore we must join their number to be able to bring those beings that we perceive as not having been fully taken care of, still all of our mother beings. And we must become a Buddha for the sake of all these beings. And this is where we then begin with today, of having conceived that mind that aspires to become a Buddha for the sake of all beings, that turns the heart into making a purpose to evolution, to all of our continuum of future existences. However we conceive of that, whether it's through a system of reincarnation or a system of transmigration, or whether it's through a material system of the law of conservation of energy, whatever our sense of being connected into the continuity of the future, we determine that whatever atom of us, or whatever bit of our consciousness, or whatever goes forward, we will not rest until we have become the engine of the liberation and the freedom and the happiness of all beings. We can relax from the more meditative thing, although we're staying within the jewel refuge tree. And we're coming up to what I call mind reform, which is involved with the exchange of self and other teaching. And others call mind training or mind transformation, Lojong. One's becoming a bodhisattva, a child, a son or daughter of the Buddhas. It's all in this border of resolving to achieve the spirit of enlightenment, resolving to be the bodhisattva, developing the heroic conception of saving all beings from suffering. And in that is this wonderful mind reform method where one really focuses very drastically on the self-preoccupation habit, to really focus and see how all of our troubles in life come from being self-preoccupied, and how all virtues and all happinesses and benefits in life come from being other preoccupied instead, exchanging the self-preoccupation for the other preoccupation. Seeing how seeking our own well-being exclusively, we have harmed others immeasurable times over previous lives, and by those negative karmic acts, or even thought that, mentally harmed them, verbally harmed them, physically harmed them, and by those acts and words and thoughts harmed ourselves by adopting more negative evolutionary aspects and forms and becoming embodied in more negative evolutionary ways. And how in principle, by seeking our own self-interest, we never really will fulfill our own self-interest. So it's not just the self-interest element But it's the inefficacy of this type of pursuit of self-interest through self-preoccupation that we focus on in the mind training. And here I will just give a list of the commitments of the mind training. This kind of training where you reverse the normal behavior, the normal sort of self-aggrandizing and self-promoting behavior, because you're substituting other promotion for self-promotion. You're substituting other preoccupation for self-preoccupation. So it's really like the opposite way from the people of the world. They say, practice mind reform without contradicting other commitments. Avoid reckless behavior. Avoid being biased. Make changes to your aspiration, intensify it while remaining natural. Do not criticize the faults of others. Do not contemplate others' faults. Purify your greatest delusion first. Abandon all hope for results. Abandon poisonous food. Be grudging with your delusions. Do not retaliate to abuse. Do not wait in ambush. Do not pinpoint the weaknesses of others. Do not use others as scapegoats. Do not misuse the Dharma. Never aim to be the quickest to the top. Do not turn a god into a demon. And do not seek happiness by causing others suffering. Each one of these has an extensive instruction, but they indicate a person who is on vacation, basically. This is the training of someone who has the mind of transcendence. They're on vacation from the normal mundane goals. They're not seeking normal success, normal status, normal ego space, normal victory. Therefore, they're looking for something completely different out of all of their relationships. They're looking to transform the mind from being self-preoccupied to being other-preoccupied. In every exchange, they're looking for the happiness of the other. Therefore, let the enemy have the victory. Let them win. Let them have it. Go ahead. Take the defeat oneself. If they abuse one, take the benefit of the abuse by building your tolerance and patience, and do not think of retaliating. Be only grudging about your own delusions. Be critical of your own faults and biases. If someone harms you, you should not hold this in mind and wait for an opportunity to take revenge. Strengthen your mind of patience instead, and find ways to forgive the harm done to you. Do not pinpoint the weaknesses of others. In your actions, be careful not to offend others, whether humans or spirits. Never humiliate them by pointing out their weak spots in front of others. Do not misuse the Dharma. The Mahayana purpose of the Dharma teachings, and the mind training in particular, is to gain enlightenment to benefit all beings. You should therefore avoid using the teachings just to promote yourself and gain wealth, reputation, or other worldly success. If I was giving these talks and we were doing this retreat with a view to trying to gain worldly success, that would really be the wrong thing to do. Far from getting that, we would get all kinds of negative results. I do love the mind Reformed tradition, as little as I'm able to practice it, or perform it, as I like to say, because it really is so radical and so marvelous. It engages enlightened self-interest, not merely some sort of sentimental altruism. It really proceeds by recognizing the fact that if you are preoccupied with your own condition all the time, it will always be unsatisfactory to you, and you will only narrow your being and make yourself smaller and close up more and more and become less and less enlightened. We listen to this voice within that we identify as ourselves, telling us constantly, well, now, is that going to make you happy? Is this going to be nice? And what can you do for yourself today? What should you do for yourself today? Etc., etc. And we're constantly engaged in this inner focus and inner attention on our self-situation. But then those times, if we reflect, when we really feel happy, when we have a moment of relief from this constant inner griping and inner restlessness and inner discontent, is when something has happened to us aesthetically, sensorily, or intellectually, in engagement with others, when we are doing something really wonderful and another is really benefiting from it, like we've given a gift and we're just temporarily distracted from our own inner self-preoccupation by someone just jumping up and down for joy, by someone feeling, wow, isn't this great, thanks so much, oh, I'm so happy, this is really nice, blah, 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 you know. And we're just for a moment caught up in the joy, like when you give a child a new toy or some kind of special thing and they're just absorbed with it and they're just entranced with it. And then you forget about your own dissatisfaction and you just enjoy their enjoyment. And so this teaching recognizes that the essence of the happiness of those moments in life are that we're no longer thinking about our condition. The minute we have an experience and we stop to evaluate it and say, how fun was that to me? How much did I enjoy them enjoying their new toy? When we have that thought, then we completely lose the enjoyment. How great was that Van Gogh that I saw? And then it's never good enough. Since those times of other preoccupation are the times when we are happy ourselves, let us just go straight to the other preoccupation. Let's not just be self-preoccupied and then now and then find something, be surprised by something where we become other preoccupied and we're momentarily distracted from our cycle of inner despair and inner misery. Let us go for the other preoccupation. Let us focus on them. Let us always think of being there for sentient beings. What we're doing is for sentient beings. And forget about the result for ourselves. It is acting without focusing on the results of the act. Acting just purely out of the joy of the action. Out of the virtue of the action. And not thinking about any result. And this is the yoga of positive evolutionary action. This is what they call acting transcendently with the overlooking of the three sectors of the act. That is to say, when you give a gift, you don't perceive yourself as the giver. You don't perceive the gift as a gift. You don't perceive the receiver as the receiver. Something flows from this part of you to that part of you. And in a way you've done it without perceiving yourself doing it. without taking note of it, without appropriating, saying, oh, I'm so great, I gave a gift. Or, gee, was it too big a gift I gave? Or, gee, am I going to miss that myself later? All this kind of thing which ruins the transcendence of any gift or any act. This is the mind transformation teaching. The teaching of all of the great saints of Tibet, acting in this kind of amazing, unconventional way. As Milarepa used to say, people of the world seem crazy to the Dharma person, because the people of the world are seeking wealth and security and shelter and comfort and possessions and status and so forth. Everything that the Dharma person sees as melting away like dew with the rising of the sun. Completely unsubstantial results. And people of Dharma see the inner world of the opening of the soul to generosity and tolerance and wisdom and openness and freedom as the only thing worthwhile. And this can be enhanced sometimes by poverty. It can be enhanced by accepting injury, by accepting defeat, if you do it in the right way. It can be enhanced by not retaliating, by not seeking to compete, only competing with yourself, competing against your self-preoccupation, bringing other preoccupation to bear against self-preoccupation. So then the way that the Dharma person lives, like Milarepa, it looks insane to the people of the world. For example, Milarepa used to say, most mothers and fathers have a big thing about giving wealth to their children. They want to leave them a legacy, some money or a house, possessions, their social status. But actually all of those things simply trap the offspring into feeling that those are the worthwhile things in life, and then they might be deceived into spending their whole life seeking more wealth and status and fame and possessions. Whereas if one really wanted the full happiness, the total enlightenment of that offspring, one might give them teaching of Dharma rather than material things. At least give it in addition to some sort of material assistance. Nothing wrong with a certain degree of material assistance to leave people free of being preoccupied with only surviving, getting by. But to leave that as if that were the only thing, and not to have a higher aspiration for one's child, is in a way harmful to that child, entrapping them deeper and deeper into the worldly concerns. That's a little taste of the mind transformation tradition. I have a proverb for it in English. I say, Buddha is as Buddha does. Meaning that we shouldn't hold Buddhahood or enlightenment so far away from ourselves. Sometimes when you're too religious and you think, I've got to concentrate, I've got to be on retreat, I've got to become enlightened so I can help all beings, and then meanwhile, I don't want to help this one being over here. I refuse to give $1 to this being. I'm going to squabble and quarrel with that being about who gets to sit where in the retreat. We become less focused on the day-to-day mindfulness of our day-to-day being as we would be if we were Buddha. Once I am Buddha, then I'll be nice. Then I won't struggle to the top. I'll perceive you as more important than myself, and so on. When I am Buddha, that's the way Buddha's consciousness is. But until I get that, I better be more focused on myself to get to be Buddha. But Shantideva says, Buddha only thinks of the welfare of others. Buddha has no thought for him or herself. Because the Buddha, him or herself, is utterly self-satisfied in total blissful freedom. So they don't need anything. However, they don't shut out of their awareness the neediness of other beings. And therefore the only thing remaining for them to do in the world is to satisfy the needs of the other beings. And of course, satisfying them ultimately doesn't just mean giving material things or palliating their suffering, but it means giving them the Dharma teachings which will enable them to liberate themselves from suffering and its cause. Now we come to the Bodhisattva vow. Not that we are going to be taking the Bodhisattva vow in this retreat unless you already do have it. And then one can always keep retaking it, because it's always good to renew. And here, in order to take the Bodhisattva vow, we have to know what the Bodhisattva vow is. And there are said to be the 18 root vows of the Bodhisattva. Bodhisattva vow is not only just saying, I vow to save all beings, although that's the central gist of it. But the Bodhisattva vow has 18 root and 46 branch vows. What are the ways in which you determine to guide your interaction with others when you are born again in a mode of where you're living for others more than living for self, or living for self through living for others primarily, having exchanged self-preoccupation for other preoccupation. What is wonderful about this aspect also, it's so like other world religions, the good aspects of all the other world religions, the aspect of the Sermon on the Mount of Jesus, the great compassion he taught, the great compassion taught in Islam of Allah al-Rahman, of being compassionate for others, Confucius's notion of being loyal and gracious with others and feeling true love for them, Ran. Westerners have translated as humanity, like being humanitarian with others because they have some sort of unemotional concept about Chinese civilization, which is wrong. Ran means love. Be loving with others. And by being loving with others, then everything you do with them will be automatically gracious. In Hinduism, they have the love of God, bhakti, and they have the maitri and all of the loving virtues of others, gentleness and nonviolence, ahimsa. Common human religion of kindness, of friendliness, of love and compassion. Every human being needs love from others. They couldn't live without loving relationships with others. And they would never be happy themselves unless they love others. And you don't need religion for that. It's a common biological fact. We are kind of a group being. And the Bodhisattva vows do acknowledge that. The first root downfall, for example, is to praise yourself and depreciate others. Not giving the Dharma to those who need it, or not giving material things to those who need them. Not forgiving someone when they do sincerely apologize. Abandoning the universal outlook of the Mahayana teaching. Abandoning the idea that all beings deserve full happiness and full enlightenment. Making use of offerings given to the three jewels, using them yourself. Abandoning the Dharma, saying that some teaching of the Dharma that we don't personally like, that is not like fit with my idea. Oh, that's no good, that's stupid, oh, Buddha couldn't have said that. Pushing monks or nuns to disrobe and go off and be normal worldly people by not really realizing what a great virtue it is to enter the vacation realm, the resort of the monastic sangha. Committing the 5 heinous crimes, killing father, mother, a saint, wounding a Buddha, or creating a division in the community, holding unrealistic views, completely destroying towns, and so on. The bombing of Yugoslavia was a little bit, unfortunately, too much like this. Civilian bombing in general. People who've done that, even though they were on the right side, they were against the horrible genociding dictator Hitler, Shiite killing Saddam Hussein, or genocidal Milosevic. But by going too far and doing this cowardly thing of bombing and destroying civilians and destroying entire towns, they are certainly losing their bodhisattva vow, although they're on the right side. Teaching voidness to the unprepared. And here the danger is in teaching voidness, emptiness. This is something which I'm about to do. I hope I'm not losing my bodhisattva vow. You better be prepared, everybody who's listening to this throughout all future time. This is something in the Buddhist tradition, where in the Tibetan tradition, where they feel that voidness or selflessness is sort of a little bit like a secret teaching or an advanced teaching, because it could be confusing for someone to realize that they have no fixed identity without being prepared in some other way of how to deal with that freedom. That is the teaching of freedom, but freedom is dangerous for someone unprepared for it. It might freak them out. They're a little reserved about teaching voidness or emptiness or freedom in its full form of wisdom. But I don't agree with it personally in the modern time, but I do believe that people in the modern world already have a kind of involuntary experience of identitylessness. The reason that is dangerous for people in more traditional societies was that they were sort of quite comfortable cultural matrices that they lived in, and they didn't have this tremendous encounter with nihility or with nothingness that the modern people have. And we modern people, all of us already start out almost thinking that we're nothing. So it's not dangerous to us. It's considered dangerous for someone with a naive sense of identity to lose that and then mistake the loss of it for that they are nothing and become nihilistic. But all of us in the modern realm are nihilistic. And therefore we need the medicine of emptiness and selflessness, I think, as the critique of nothingness, as the critique of nihility. Reversing others' aspiration for complete enlightenment. If someone decides to become a bodhisattva and wants to save all beings, sort of persuading them that that's too difficult, why don't you just go and do this, do some other thing, don't try to do it. Causing someone to abandon individual liberation, someone who is a monastic, whatever their particular ethical vow or level of discipline is, to tell them that's useless and forget it and have a good time. Disparaging the monastic vehicle is losing of the bodhisattva vow. Never think that the bodhisattva vehicle, the universal vehicle, is in any way against the monastic vehicle. It totally presupposes the monastic vehicle. It's totally essential that people have the mind of transcendence and the ethic of transcendence before they can begin to have the mind of universal compassion and the ethic of universal salvation. Otherwise, if they don't have the mind of transcendence before that, they don't really know what is the salvation they want to make for everybody. They have no idea. They have not even experienced the first sort of relief of transcendence themselves. Just as the mind of compassion, to develop love for others, you have to first love yourself in wishing yourself to have freedom, and not just love yourself in a fake way by wishing yourself to have comfort or wealth or security, all of which will be illusory. As compassion depends upon transcendence, so the Mahayana depends upon the monastic vehicle. Falsely claiming to have realized emptiness, if you don't really understand what is actual reality, but you pretend that you do, receiving the property of the monastics, when someone else steals or destroys a monastery or some sort of icon or something like that, and then you become the broker for that defense. If you're a yogi and you're doing retreat and you're doing intense practice and you are given gifts by donors to support your practice, your performance, and then you, because you're irritated with the donor or something like that, you give those gifts away to someone who's not seriously practicing, that's the root downfall. And finally, and the most importantly, the 18th of them, is giving up the spirit of enlightenment. Getting discouraged to someone really angers you, you feel very great anger or hatred for that person, you decide, I cannot be a bodhisattva, I cannot save all beings because I won't save this one. This one is just too horrible, and I refuse to be embarked in the quest of Buddhahood for the sake of saving this Hitler, this Saddam Hussein, this terrible, creepy person who just did all these nasty things. That one I'm leaving out. But if you leave out even one sentient being, once you take the vow to determination to save all beings, to then lose it by giving somebody up, some being up, is considered not good. And that is why you shouldn't rush to take the Bodhisattva vow. There is a ceremony, for example, if you eventually decide to do something like that at some stage, you make a vow to try to learn to make the vow. You don't rush into it. On the other hand, of course, if you do have the vision, as I said earlier, which I think is the key to it all, the vision of the infinite continuity of life, your life, personally, even though you'll change personality, of course, in other lives, and the lives of all the other beings that you know, and you recognize that we are in this together, we're in each other's faces for the infinite future. If you really have that vision viscerally, gain the common sense feeling that that is the nature of reality, and that you're never going to get away from these other people here, these other beings, even the animals, the bugs, they're all going to be with you forever, not always in the same form. The bugs will become humans. But once you feel that as a sort of visceral common sense thing, you feel that's the cosmos that you live in, and you're bound to live in, even as a Buddha you'll be in, then it becomes actually easy and natural to take the Bodhisattva vow and really mean it, and you can't possibly lose it. You cannot give it up, because you cannot give up the quest of making all beings perfectly happy if you feel infinitely connected to those all beings. Well, you can break it. In a moment of anger or something, you can break the Bodhisattva vow and then repair it. But in order to break it where it's unrepairable, you have to think that what you did to break it was right, it didn't have a fault. You have to have no intention of trying not to break it again in the future. You have to think what you did was right in breaking it. You have to even be happy that you broke the vow. And you have no regret about it. Then there are many branch vows, 46, which I won't go into, because they're just too many. But they're very useful and wonderful. One learns the discipline of that, and one can do it it's like a discipline of altruism. It's so sensitive and other sensitive. It's like an etiquette almost, you know. You know, ethics and morals and etiquette are very interconnected in Buddhist discipline. You know, for example, in monastic discipline, it's like a kind of boot camp of gentleness, being a monk or a nun. Now, when you reach the point, of course, where you want to take the Bodhisattva vow, where you want to have the venturing mind of the Bodhisattva, the activated mind, at that time you enter the space, like this space, of the wish-granting gem tree refuge field. And you call to witness all the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas from all the universes and all the 3 times, past, present, and future, and all the 10 directions. Vast, huge, cosmic sort of feeling of all the enlightened beings from everywhere. You call them to witness and invite them in a great host to the sky, like a close encounter of the 3rd kind. And then you also must arrange very, very elaborate offerings, like really voluminous flowers, marvelous cakes and cookies and fruits and bags of rice and whatever you can, and incense and lights, and really a very big thing, a very lush display you must make to offer to this invited assembly. I mean, they obviously don't eat any of it, they don't use it, but it's the generosity, the feeling of offering, of connection that you do. And then you solemnly sort of swear, I will become a Buddha for the sake of all beings, as all the Buddhas did when they awoke from being individualistically oriented beings, just concerned with themselves and self-preoccupied beings. When they awoke from that to become other preoccupied beings, other cherishing bodhisattvas, just as they did and then eventually became Buddhas, so I too will become a bodhisattva. I too will conceive the spirit of enlightenment. I too will travel the path of the bodhisattva deeds and become a perfect Buddha for the sake of all my mother beings. Then you sort of repeat it 3 times, and then you call to witness all the beings. And this is a wonderful thing that one can do. And then it is said, when you do that, that is when you truly are born in the family of the Buddhas, as a child, of son or daughter of all the Buddhas. And you have a new kind of clan. You have a new gene, which is called your spiritual gene, your bodhisattva gene, which transforms your spiritual gene, which you take with you from life after life anyway. And you determine and you insist that your evolution and all of your experiences in life have the meaning that you give to them, which is that they are meaningful in that they are your way to Buddhahood for the sake of all beings. And then you use everything, even the most adverse conditions, even accidents and disasters and sicknesses. You turn everything into an assistant on your path, everything into fuel for your vehicle. Even sleeping, you are generating vast hosts of merit. Even you do the small view that I do this little thing. I give this coin to this beggar with a view to becoming a perfect Buddha, so I can help this beggar become perfectly happy and give him the teaching where he can become a perfect Buddha. Then, having achieved the Bodhisattva mind, you must be rejoiced and you must be delighted, like someone who is born again, actually. Because you are born again when you really take that Bodhisattva vow. You have done something just truly magnificent. You have changed your life. You have changed your whole orientation in life. In the words of Shantideva, you say, just as the previous lords of bliss conceived the enlightenment spirit, and just as they successively lived by the Bodhisattva practices, likewise for the sake of all that lives, do I conceive the spirit of enlightenment, and likewise shall I too successively follow the practices. In order to further increase it from now on, the intelligent who have vividly taken the spirit of enlightenment in this way should extol it in the following manner and congratulate themselves. Today, to each of us who takes that Bodhisattva vow or even imagines or decides or determines that we want to develop to where we can take the Bodhisattva vow, this is how we will greet ourselves upon doing that. Today my life has borne fruit. Having well obtained this human existence, I've been born in the family of Buddha, and now am one of Buddha's children. Thus, whatever actions I do from now on must be in accord with the family tradition. Never shall I do anything to disgrace this holy, faultless family. Just like a blind man discovering a jewel in a heap of trash, likewise, by some coincidence, I have found the enlightenment spirit within me. It is the supreme elixir that overcomes the Lord of Death. It is the inexhaustible treasure that eliminates all poverty in the world. It is the supreme medicine that cures the world's disease. It is the evergreen tree that shelters all beings wandering tired on the roads of life. It is the universal bridge that frees beings from wretched lives. It is the rising moon of the mind that dispels the torment of addictions. It is the great sun that burns away the misty ignorance of the world. It is the quintessential butter from the churning of the milk of Dharma. For all guests traveling the path of life who wish to experience the true happiness, this spirit will satisfy them with joy and exalt them in the highest bliss. Today, in the presence of all the saviors, I invite the world to be my guests at the feast of temporal and ultimate bliss. May gods, humans, and all be joyful. So that then concludes the spirit of enlightenment. And anyone who's even imagined ever cultivating it, opening their heart and turning it inside out in this wonderful way, and coming up with this marvelous, magnificent resolution to make all of evolution meaningful, and they themselves make it meaningful by becoming a perfectly enlightened being, the engine of the happiness of all other beings.
This concludes Part 1 of Session 4 of the Jewel Tree of Tibet. Our program continues with the next CD. Sounds True presents The Jewel Tree of Tibet, Session 4, Part 2, with Robert Thurman.
Now we come to the third theme. It is said that just by achieving the mind of transcendence and then developing the mind of universal compassion and realizing that one's ultimate freedom depends on creating the ultimate freedom of all beings, now we come to the actual root of freedom itself. And now I come back to what I mentioned to you in our first session together, that the Buddha basically realized that the key to salvation can't just be compassion in the sense of just a willing freedom from suffering. It must be an understanding of the nature of reality. This understanding in extreme development is called transcendent wisdom, meaning because it is a kind of awareness, a thorough and total knowledge. It is not just some sort of resignation or coexistence or being with or something. It's a real knowing of everything. Knowing of everything in a way by becoming everything. It's symbolized by the sword of wisdom with flames at the tip. The flames being like a lamp, like a laser light that burns through the darkness of delusion. So this wisdom is in fact the actual thing that accomplishes our liberation. It is the actual tool. It is the actual vehicle of the liberation. Wishing for one's own and all beings' liberation is very crucial and very powerful, but it will not by itself accomplish that liberation. Being transcendent about all lower aims and giving up all mundane preoccupations is extremely essential to give oneself the space and time to focus on the depths of reality. But finally, we have to come to an understanding of the depths of reality. Again, as I said at the very beginning, the wonderful thing about the Buddha's teaching is that it is not just a religious teaching about something we have to believe in. It is a scientific teaching that says that the nature of the world is such that if we understand it, we will be free. But we can only be free again by understanding it. We won't be free by just believing that if maybe somebody else understood it, it is freedom, or that somebody else said it is freedom. By itself, believing in that will not bring the freedom. We have to come to the understanding of it. And now we have a new set of arpeggios, a new set of scales, a new structure for the discovery and the unfolding of our wisdom. First of all, we can say there are three types of wisdom. The three types of wisdom are the wisdom born of learning. The second type is the wisdom born of critical reflection. The third type of wisdom is the wisdom born of meditative insight. Sometimes people tend to think that they should jump and meditate right away. And actually it is good to meditate right away, because if we don't meditate on something positive, just by going around in the world and thinking in our own minds, in a way we're meditating on our negative habits of self-preoccupation. So, in a way, it's not a choice in life. Should I be a Buddhist or a Hindu or a yogi or not a yogi? Should I meditate or not meditate? There is no question that a human being is always meditating. Every single person listening to this is meditating all the time. When you walk down the street thinking something in your mind, like, where am I? What shall I do? That is a meditation. And the problem is that the mind has its own habit energy of self-preoccupation. And then the society, the culture has a very powerful cultural habit energy that it imposes on us, repeating and repeating its theory of reality, its cosmology. It is like a constant stream of reinforcement of our habitual world picture, our habitual social picture, our habitual cultural picture. We're constantly meditating on all of these things. However, in the context of specifically meditating on the nature of reality, to aim our meditation, to make our meditative insight effective, we first have to learn something. So in a way, we have to do the meditation that involves learning. And then second, we have to do the meditation that involves critical reflection. And this often involves discussion and debate with others. In the Tibetan tradition and in the ancient Indian tradition, debate was a crucial part of the discipline of the monastics, because you had to debate with others to argue and use reason and see the fallaciousness of some of your prejudices and biased reasonings. You had to develop that ability to develop a strong critical awareness. And then when you are internally meditating without another being present, you will be critiquing your own negative minds, your own prejudiced attitudes. They will advance their arguments, you will advance opponent arguments, and you will come to the truth in meditation. If you don't analyze and bring up what you falsely misthink, misknow, then you'll never come to true knowledge. In the learning type of wisdom, we therefore learn sort of the layout of the universe as selfless, as empty, as free from any intrinsic reality. In doing that, there's sort of two levels of it. There are what is called subjective selflessness and objective selflessness. Subjective selflessness means that yourself as a subjectivity is not fixed, independent, absolute thing in itself. Is sort of an outside witness of what is going on, but doesn't change in any way itself. Objective selflessness means, and it sounds funny at first talking about the self of an object, right? Since we think self is sort of a personal thing. But actually we use the expression self with objects, if you think about it. We say the table itself, the sun, the moon itself, themselves, right? We use the word self. Self is like a reflexive pronoun that goes back to the thing we've mentioned and seems to hit as if it were the essence of the thing. For example, when we say the table itself, we're thinking of a table as having some sort of essential thing about it that gives it its tableness. We don't think, oh, we're creating the table by thinking of it as a table. Our perception, even without thinking anything, seems to have the table looming up at us as if it were a thing in itself. Now, if we actually do a thought experiment with the table, it's easier to start with the table. And we look to see, like, what is the table? Okay, I'm looking at this table here. I put my finger on it. Now, I could take a little jigsaw and cut off that piece of wood that I just put my finger on, and would you say the table was still there? Without the part I just touched, you would say that. It would be a table with a little hole in it. If we took one leg off and only had 3 legs and propped it up on a stack of cinder blocks, would it still be the table? Yes, it would. So then actually that leg wasn't the table. So none of the legs, in fact, are the table. In fact, none of the parts of the table are the table. Or we could disassemble all the parts and put them in a box and mail it to our friend. Here's the table. And yet it would be all disassembled in pieces. Then, you could go down to subatomic analysis of the atoms in the wood of the table, the quantum level, the wave-particle paradox, etc. Basically, the table dissolves under analysis. In fact, anything in the universe that you can find dissolves under analysis. A marvelous thing about the modern period is that modern investigative science is coming up through its analysis of the material objects of the world with a similar conclusion as that which the Buddha reached thousands of years ago, that everything dissolves under analysis. There is no indivisible particle. In our modern 20th century, there was a lot of relativistic anxiety among scientists and philosophers, which is still very heightened and still goes on a lot, because it's hard for them to get used to the idea that we're living in a universe that essentially is gossamer. It is essentially illusory. Seemingly solid objects are made of atoms which themselves are completely diaphanous, mostly empty space. And then even the nuclei and the little hard particles, which we can picture at some meso level as being hard, when looked at inside, they themselves dissolve into inscrutable charms and quarks and quirks and mesons and bosons and every other kind of bozos. When you meditate, actually, you meditate second on objective selflessness, the selflessness of objects. But I'm starting with it because it connects nicely with modern science's discovery through quantum physics particularly, and through relativity of relativistic classical physics too. But there they posit certain absolutes, whereas the emptiness theory, the selflessness reality, posits no absolutes, except that. The only absolute is the lack of an absolute. The only absolute is the absolute's emptiness of itself. Therefore, emptiness is something that does not impede the infinite relativity of all relative things, the surface realities. Like a mirror surface. A mirror surface has nothing on itself, but it reflects all of the objects reflected in it. The universe is reflected in the surface of emptiness. The reflections are nothing but the surface. They're not something extra on the surface. It won't reflect anything if it's held towards empty sky. It'll seem empty. If it's held towards differentiated objects, it will reflect differentiated objects. Now that's the meaning of what is called objective selflessness, or objective emptiness. We live in a world that is illusory. It isn't an illusion. That is to say, utterly unreal. It's like an illusion. It's somewhat unreal. It is somewhat real as relative processes. If you don't analyze and bring up what you falsely misthink, misknow, then you'll never come to true knowledge. In the learning type of wisdom, we therefore learn sort of the layout of the universe as selfless, as empty, as free from any intrinsic reality. In doing that, there's sort of two levels of it. There are what is called subjective selflessness and objective selflessness. Subjective selflessness means that yourself as a subjectivity is not fixed, independent, absolute thing in itself, is sort of an outside witness of what is going on, but doesn't change in any way itself. Objective selflessness means, and it sounds funny at first talking about the self of an object, right? Since we think self is sort of a personal thing. But actually we use the expression self with objects, if you think about it. We say the table itself, the sun, the moon itself, themselves, right? We use the word self. Self is like a reflexive pronoun that goes back to the thing we've mentioned and seems to hit as if it were the essence of the thing. For example, when we say the table itself, we're thinking of a table as having some sort of essential thing about it that gives it its tableness. We don't think, oh, we're creating the table by thinking of it as a table. Our perception, even without thinking anything, seems to have the table looming up at us as if it were a thing in itself. Now, if we actually do a thought experiment with the table, it's easier to start with the table. And we look to see, like, what is the table? Okay, I'm looking at this table here. I put my finger on it. Now I could take a little jigsaw and cut off that piece of wood that I just put my finger on, and would you say the table was still there? Without the part I just touched, you would say that. It would be a table with a little hole in it. If we took one leg off and only had 3 legs and propped it up on a stack of cinder blocks, would it still be the table? Yes, it would. So then actually that leg wasn't the table. So none of the legs, in fact, are the table. In fact, none of the parts of the table are the table. Or we could disassemble all the parts and put them in a box and mail it to our friend. Here's the table. And yet it would be all disassembled in pieces. Then, you know, you could go down to subatomic analysis of the atoms in the wood of the table, the quantum level, the wave-particle paradox, etc. Basically, the table dissolves under analysis. In fact, anything in the universe that you can find dissolves under analysis. A marvelous thing about the modern period is that modern investigative science is coming up through its analysis of the material objects of the world with a similar conclusion as that which the Buddha reached thousands of years ago, that everything dissolves under analysis. There is no indivisible particle. In our modern 20th century, there was a lot of relativistic anxiety among scientists and philosophers, which is still very heightened and still goes on a lot, because it's hard for them to get used to the idea that we're living in a universe that essentially is gossamer. It is essentially illusory. Seemingly solid objects are made of atoms which themselves are completely diaphanous, mostly empty space. And then even the nuclei and the little hard particles, which we can picture at some meso level as being hard, when looked at inside, they themselves dissolve into inscrutable charms and quarks, mesons and bosons and every other kind of bozos. When you meditate, actually, you meditate second on objective selflessness, the selflessness of objects. But I'm starting with it because it connects nicely with modern science's discovery through quantum physics particularly, and through relativity of relativistic classical physics too, but there they posit certain absolutes, whereas the emptiness theory, the selflessness reality, posits no absolutes, except that. The only absolute is the lack of an absolute. The only absolute is the absolute's emptiness of itself. Therefore, emptiness is something that does not impede the infinite relativity of all relative things, the surface realities. Like a mirror surface. A mirror surface has nothing on itself, but it reflects all of the objects reflected in it. All of the universe is reflected in the surface of emptiness. The reflections are nothing but the surface. They're not something extra on the surface. It won't reflect anything if it's held towards empty sky. It'll seem empty. If it's held towards differentiated objects, it will reflect differentiated objects. Now that's the meaning of what is called objective selflessness, or objective emptiness. We live in a world that is illusory. It isn't an illusion. That is to say, utterly unreal. It's like an illusion. It's somewhat unreal. It is somewhat real as relative processes, relative things, some sort of uninscrutable, indescribable, or multi-describable relative things. It is not absolutely unreal, but it is somewhat unreal. Because each thing in the world seems absolute as a thing in itself. When we investigate, we discover that it is not absolute. The ultimate reality would be something that does not dissolve under analysis, that is real in the way in which it appears. And so we would assume there would be some sort of non-apparent absolute, or maybe an absolute which would appear to us if we had the wisdom of emptiness. Even people will talk like, oh yeah, so-and-so achieved a direct experience of emptiness, they say. As if like emptiness were like a big giant space or something that they saw. But who ever saw space? No one can see space. When you say I see space, it means like I didn't see anything. Is all it means. I didn't see anything seeming to fill a space. You never see the space. Space is a negation in that sense. It's a pure negation. Similarly, emptiness or absolute away from solution, away from relationship is a kind of negation. And negations are such that they're different than objects, positive objects, in that negations are seen when you don't see what they're negating. You look for the elephant and you don't see an elephant, and you negate that the elephant is there. You don't ever see a non-elephant. So it's a different type of awareness in a way. So the absolute is only known through that negative awareness of failing to see any other thing that is absolute in itself. And therefore, they say when you look for the nature of things and you analyze them and they dissolve under analysis, your non-finding of those things is your discovery of emptiness. is your discovery of ultimate reality, is your direct experience of ultimate reality when everything melts away. However, if you then turn in some deep state and look for the emptiness itself, then you can't find that either. You conceive of emptiness as if it were a thing sort of different in kind from the things that you had presumed to be in it. You can't find it. So that is called the emptiness of emptiness, or the emptiness of the absolute, which is the antidote to dualism, actually. But here I'm jumping ahead. I'm just giving this because this gives us an initial feeling about the nature of the world as the Buddha understood it and as the great Buddhist philosophers and scientists explained it, ever more and more sophisticated ways, depending on the more and more sophisticated needs of the people to understand. That concludes a little bit of unpacking of the objective selflessness or objective emptiness, and gives you a little sense of what it is. Emptiness is not nothingness. The emptiness of the table is not that the table is nothing. The emptiness of the table is that the table is empty of a fixed essence that makes it a table. Therefore, it only becomes a table when we use it like a table, interactively, relationally, at various ways, in relation to its causes, in relation to its parts, in relation to our use of it and our designations for it. So in relation to our minds, in other words. So it does have some relative existence. It is not nothing. But it is empty of being absolutely a table as it seems to be when we originally encounter it. When we originally encounter the table, it seems like a thing in itself to us. And so many philosophers, West and East, throughout history, have come up with ideas about the table as a pure idea of a table. A table has some sort of essential table identity in it and all this kind of thing. There are many theories by philosophers that fit with this naive feeling that we have instinctively when we encounter an object, that the object is a thing in itself. But that should give you some sense of how it is empty and how that emptiness of it confirms its relativity rather than annihilates it into a nothingness. That's very important to understand from the beginning. Now we come to the topic which we would first meditate on, which is the topic of personal selflessness, personal self and personal selflessness. And in this one I want to emphasize again at the beginning, right away, and here I will pay tribute to the Tibetans particularly. That is, in Buddha's proclaiming ultimate selflessness, he always taught a relative self. That is to say, when someone says, well, who is it who understands my selflessness? And he says, well, it is you yourself. And what did he mean by that? He meant your relative self. If there is no self, who is it who is reborn? And the answer is your relative self. If the question comes, if there is no self, who is it who becomes a Buddha? And the answer is your relative self becomes the Buddha. Anything that exists in the world exists relationally. And in a way, even the absolute is our notion of the opposite of the relational. If you say absolute means uncreated, unrelated, unconnected, undestroyed, everything opposite of all relative things, it cannot possibly be in any kind of contact with relative things and retain its absoluteness. And therefore, if it ever existed as a thing in itself, it would be irrelevant to anything relative, such as any being or any God or anybody. It would be irrelevant. However, understanding this is not irrelevant. Understanding this is liberation, in fact. Because the fact is, our mental habit is such that we absolutize every relative, not only some notion of the absolute, but we absolutize every relative thing. I live in a world of book, table, and especially me, myself, that I think is really real. To me, like, my inner self is absolutely, indubitably there. And so is the table and the floor. And so is the world. I am absolutizing, making an absolute out of something that is relative. When I am free of doing that, then I am free to be a relative self. A relative self is content with impermanence and change. A relative self realizes it is not isolated from other things and that its sense of difference and sense of individuation is only arbitrary, is only temporary. And the Tibetans were great about unpacking the relative self and what they call the conventional self, and recognizing that even Buddha has a relative self, and an ignorant person has a relative self, and that the teaching of selflessness is freeing that relative self from false superimpositions of absoluteness, and in so freeing it, thereby changes suffering to happiness. Now, how do we meditate on the personal or subjective selflessness, on wisdom as relating to our own personal self? This is the next step we take. I wanted to give the caveat and underline the caveat because when you begin to meditate on selflessness, people will genuinely have visceral reactions of either fear or delight, in some cases, that they will think that the great thing to do is to discover that they are nothing, and that everything is nothing. And that's liberation. And that is absolutely wrong. The fear of it is wrong, and the delight in it by a more escapist mentality is wrong. Because again, remember, this comes back to one of our overarching themes. I think one of the overarching themes of all of Buddha's insight, which is that there is no nothing. Therefore, you cannot become nothing, and you never have been nothing. And therefore, you need not fear becoming nothing. Since you have been living so long with your relative self, entwined around some sort of mentally constructed never existing but strongly insisted upon absolute self, when you see through the absoluteness of that self, it seems as if you saw through the relative self, and you can have moments of feeling as if you disappear. You can have such a moment because the real relative self and the unreal absolute self have been so fused in your habitual psychological perception and your self-experience for so long that when you see through the harmful, unreal one, it kind of takes away the real one, the helpful real one, just for a second. You control that by recognizing that you could not be experiencing nothing, because it isn't anything that can be experienced. And what you are experienced is your own notion of nothing. And since it is nothing, you will come right through that. And you will then be free of the false absoluteness of your existence, and you will achieve truly relational existence. Now we come to actually meditating selflessness with those sort of warnings and that encouragement at the beginning. And this is a teaching known as the teaching of the 4 keys. And in this teaching of the 4 keys to the attainment of personal selflessness, the first key is called the key of the identification of what is to be negated. And that which is to be negated is, of course, the self. Lessness means lacking, the absence of. So selflessness is a negative expression, meaning that there is no self. But what kind of self is there not? You have to know what the self would be if it were there. And here there's a wonderful meditative teaching about how we can identify our absolutized self. The self held to be the real self by the instinctual and intellectual self-habits. How can we recognize that absolutized self? Remember a time when you were falsely accused. It doesn't have to be something super big. It could be a parking infraction. It could be of drinking up the last of the milk in the icebox. Whatever it is, it won't be hard for any of us to think of a time when we felt righteously indignant having been falsely accused. At that moment when we feel that righteous indignation, especially when we're in the right and our accuser is in the wrong, has made a mistake, although perhaps accusing us with some vehemence, we then feel a strong, I didn't. I am innocent. I am right. When the I comes out, it has almost like a slightly strangled or choked feeling to it, because what it refers to seems to be so solid. I know it's me, I know I'm I, and I didn't do it. I can safely be righteous about my I because I'm right, and I didn't do it. So we go, I, and then we feel really solid inside. Now, it is said that when you feel furious anger, when you've been harmed, the self feels more absolutely, not only just righteously indignant at false accusation, but absolutely outraged, having been harmed. But they say that's not a good time to remember, because you can't witness yourself at that time. You're so blown away. Whereas under righteous indignation, you can still have some presence of mind. Now they say you have to split your consciousness to meditate on this properly, this first key of the 4 keys of the personal selflessness, now approached in a meditative way. And you have to look at yourself being righteously there, like you're sort of observing yourself from a corner, and your main self is still being righteous and being there. Only by developing this sort of subtle splitting of awareness and watching yourself very demurely, so to speak, will your own self-habit emerge in full glory, in all its splendor. And this is absolutely crucial, that it do so. I believe the 11th Dalai Lama it was who wrote, we should spend 6 months doing just this, not proceed any further in the meditation on selflessness or emptiness, in transcendent wisdom meditation, because without first being aware of this, we'll get no realization. And what is also very, very clear about it is that Buddha's non-dogmatic approach is very clearly revealed here through this procedure. Because the Buddha doesn't say, oh, I say all things are selflessness, I expect you to believe that. It would do us no good to believe in selflessness. If we did, we would inevitably misunderstand it as some sort of real nothingness, and we would think we're nothing. That's the big key. And I'm sorry, but I know many people who think of themselves as Buddhists who misapprehend selflessness as being non-existent. And therefore they're meditating away hard as can be, hard as rocks, expecting themselves to experientially disappear. Most unfortunate ones have actually had an experience of disappearing, and they become attached to that, and they feel that's been their enlightenment. And those beings are cut off from their compassion, they're cut off from the life of liberation, and they're stuck in the anteroom of liberation, which is the momentary experience of nothingness, and thinking of nothingness as an absolute, solid, concrete, ultimate reality thing in itself. So instead, the Buddha doesn't say you must believe in selflessness. The Buddha says, I recognize that you don't believe in selflessness, and you must recognize that. You must recognize when you really observe your solid self-habit arising out of your solar plexus, in your throat, in your chest and heart, like I, me, really me, life and death ready to struggle, me. That you say, it's very nice, Buddha, you said I'm selfless, but I sure am not. I do not agree with you. So then Buddha is not asking for belief. Instead, what he is doing is Buddha is challenging us. He is saying, granted, you feel you're really you. And I'm glad you now can feel how strongly you feel that feeling, and how much that feeling powerfully dominates your experience of everything. Often it's dormant. You can sit and meditate and look in your heart and look around in a calm and quiet way and feel like you can't really find anything in particular. Be mindful of each sensation, each thought as it comes up, which is very valuable to do, of course. And you then become more deeply aware of your whole complexity of all of your processes. And then you sort of don't really see anything solid in there, and you feel that, gee, you know, that's selflessness. That's what it means. There's no solid structural me. And you can have a feeling like that, and then someone can come in, kick you, and you'll leap up to defend yourself. And then that solid sense of self will jump right out. So it's crucial that we identify the thing to be negated in the teaching of selflessness, which is the sense of self, the absolute self. The independent, self-sufficient, absolute, fixed, static self. That is the referent of I. That is the referent of the Greek pronoun ego. The Indian aham. So then Buddha says, okay, I know you feel that way. I felt that way too, I can remember. I was unquestioned about it. I was going to find my enlightenment with my real self. But now I challenge you because you now have noted that this is in the core of your habitual existence, this solid sense of self. Therefore, if it is really there, as you feel it to be there, then if you look for it with all your effort, like it was the most important thing in your life, to find it, and it is as you habitually feel it to be, a thing in itself, irreducible, absolute, then you should be able to find it. If you focus deeply enough, if you look powerfully enough. So I challenge you to verify it, that's all. Because you listen to yourself when you do things. You act on the dictates of yourself when you act. The self is more absolute than your body is when it's filled with a powerful emotion. So then the second key fits right here. And it says, if the self is really there in the way it appears to me to be there, in my deepest instinctual feeling, when I put my full effort into finding it, I will discover it. And if when I pull my full effort into finding it, I do not discover it, then I will cope with the fact that it is not there. I will not allow any third option. I will not say, well, it's sort of there and not there, it's sort of here and not there, it's kind of around, and I will not trail off into some sort of vague thing that, well, I couldn't find it, but maybe it's still there. So that's the second key. And now the third key in meditation, now remember, this is specifically in meditation. The third key is when we investigate our body-mind processes with a view to discovering whether the self is the same as them or something different from them. Something like that, or is it different from them and in them and above them or beyond them or whatever. This is what we now seek to determine. The third one is where we look to see whether the self is the same as the aggregates of body and mind. The Buddhists found over the centuries of meditating that it was most helpful to have 5 levels of body and mind processes or systems. And these 5 systems are the physical systems, the sensational systems, the ideational systems, the emotional systems, and the awareness systems. So now we begin an introspective process of inventorying our 5 systems to see whether there is this unitary, solid, self-substantial, absolute self is there in those systems, or is one of those systems, or something like that. So we look through the material system, which is all of the sense organs, eye, ear, nose, tongue, touch, and their objects of textures, scents, sounds, forms, smells, tastes. And we go through all of those systems, the physical systems, the interior of the body, spine, the nervous system, the neurology of the brain, whatever anatomical pictures we have, we look everywhere. And pretty easily, because of modern medicine and modern understanding of physical body, we pretty easily can dissect every single thing in thought experiment, and we find no self amongst the physical systems. It's quite easy to do. Although even that has a powerful liberating effect when we realize how much we do identify our habitual identity or self with our body. Like I think of myself as a male because I have a male anatomy. But actually myself is not my anatomy at all. Second, we go to the sensational level, which is beginning level of mind, not material, neural impulse of pleasure, pain, and numbness. And we zoom around through the nervous system, the level of sensation, and there we don't also find any stable unitive thing like a sensory self. So we quickly go through that. Then we go to the ideational system, and that's more complicated because, of course, even the map we have of ourselves as having a body, even the map we have of our nervous system, these are all ideas themselves. So we're sort of looking in something we have an idea of with the ideas to see the ideas in it, and we find kind of a cloud of imagery, of verbal levels of discourse, all sorts of things. Even our orientation of looking for something is kind of controlled by our ideations. It becomes very complicated, actually, to look at the ideational system, the conceptual system in our being. But when we do, one thing we get clear on pretty quickly is the instability of it and the multiplicity of it. There's no way that any image or anything, any inner picture can be sort of univocal, unchanging, absolute fixed thing in itself. It's all kind of clouds of imagery, showers of forms and concepts and sounds. Then we go to the emotions, those times when we feel so absolutely concrete and solid, in times of fury, in times of righteous indignation, in times of fear and terror, in times of great lust or great greed, or great depression or alienation, we feel so solid. And it is when powerful emotions seem to be emanating from that self, or seem to have that self in their grip, that the self feels most solid. So then it's logical to think maybe it's there in the system of emotions. And we look, though, in them and we find them completely transient, completely like mercurial, powerful, but totally changing, totally buzzing, blooming, confusion type of thing. So then we come to, of course, the great candidate for this fixed self, consciousness, the fifth system. And then we break consciousness down into 6 systems within that system, 5 of them being sense consciousnesses. And the sense consciousness we recognize are visual, audio, olfactory, gustatory, and tactile. And of course we would never have a taste, we wouldn't have a vision if the consciousness didn't go and align itself with the sense organ and the object and sort of interpret it and say that's such and such a thing. But even in bare awareness, consciousness has to operate. So we realize that a great deal of our consciousness is tied up in our sense experience as just the agent or the witness or the subject of our sense impressions. And when we realize that those consciousnesses are none of them stable, none of them unitive, all of them very changeable and fluctuating. When I'm listening intently, I don't see something. When I'm looking intently, I don't hear something. When I'm tasting intently, I don't see or hear. It's sort of the consciousness jumps around, aligns with this one and that one. It's completely fluctuating in a fluid process. So then we go to the 6th consciousness, which is called mental consciousness. And then we realize that it is this mental consciousness that coordinates all of the impressions, that coordinates all of the functions and the motor realities and the emotions and the ideas and the sensations. So we think, well, there's something that's trying to unify all of these things into a unitive experience. But on the other hand, we realize that in its effort to unify our experience, it's always changing too. It's constantly dealing with new inputs from here and there, with new inner surges of emotion from here and there. There's nothing stable or fixed or absolute about it that we can discern at first glance. And then if we meditate on it further, of course, and we go deeper and deeper, we can go into where we can withdraw from sense impressions, we can withdraw from the ideational flow, we can withdraw from emotional content and affect, and we can come into some sort of mental states seeming to be pure being. We can reach the formless realms of pure infinite space, infinite consciousness, absolute nothingness, beyond consciousness and unconsciousness. But even there, we recognize that we go in and out of those states, even though while in them they seem very vast and absolute. There's a time before we were in them, when we were more out in the sense world, we withdrew. And so even they somehow never appear to be absolutist thing in themselves when we really investigate them. We cannot find in them something that fits this feeling of the absolute I. They're all changing. They're affected either in altered meditative states or in altering, constantly impermanent sensory states. And in the last ditch of this finding at the deepest core in consciousness, we come into a situation where we seem to be like a whirling dervish, where we're coming into, well, the reason I'm not finding this unaffected observer of everything, which is my unchanging self, is that it's myself that's looking. But so then I keep turning back on my looking for myself, and this is like a dog chasing its tail at a very subtle level. It becomes like a whirling feeling, and I whirl on myself, kind of catch myself when I really concentrate, and I don't accept any kind of easy things like, oh well, this realm of boundless form, this must be the real self. Because that's not an absolute. I entered into that feeling of boundless form from not feeling that, and I'll go back into it afterwards. I whirl and turn on the subjectivity, and as I do, this becomes what is called the diamond cutting drill. And I don't allow myself any kind of veering off into some zone of nothingness or some zone of boundlessness. I still feel like I'm really here doing this, so I'm still looking for my real person that's here. I don't say, well, this is just a dog chasing its tail. You never will catch yourself and drop out. I'm way past such verbalization. And in that deep inner turning of the diamond drill of wisdom, it is said, the whole knot of the self-absolutization begins to sort of erode. Or sometimes they say it's like a fire stick, a bow, with a string which you pull back and forth and makes a stick spin on another piece of wood with a little bunch of kindling around and to kindle fire without flint. So like the drilling is like the spinning of a fire stick, and then the wood itself ignites and it burns that feeling of absoluteness. The absoluteness turned against its own absoluteness in a way begins to burn the sense of absoluteness and erode it. I have an experience as if I were dissolving in empty space. Pure, clean voidness. I have a kind of feeling like that, which I must be quite careful not to think of that as being the absolute. But it doesn't seem like a self that, because it's sort of neither self nor selfless. This is referred to as the direct experience of emptiness or selflessness, like water being poured in water. And I feel vast. I don't feel like a subject looking out into an empty space. The subject, becomes a vast empty space at the same time as the realm is a vast empty space. I'm just still looking for the self here. I don't start looking and enjoying that. I don't veer off and say, oh great, here I am in space. Because I'm still looking for the self. Even though fruitlessly, but I'm not finding my failure to find it. And so this just erodes me, this launches me into this vast spaciousness. Its threshold feels a little like death. It can be very frightening. It has nothingness states and boundlessness states very close to it, which if I'm not careful, I might veer off into, hide in. But if I keep focusing on the quest of the self, I will not veer off into them. And then the quest, the quester, everything dissolves. And there is a feeling of vast space. Although it's not like I have a feeling of vast space. And therefore it is a huge relief of freedom, timeless, boundaryless, dualityless. And then at some point, the momentum of my intellect, my wisdom, empowered by concentration, evaluates being in vast space at some very subtle plane. It doesn't think. There's no words, there's no mouth, there's no language, there's no humanity, there's no life, there's no death in the experience. But yet there is the subtle probing. I stop and there's kind of like a sense of, is this space then it? And of course, it immediately disappears then itself. And what that moment kind of is like in the winter you're looking at a pane of glass and your breath has created frost on the glass. And your attention is to the frost, the surface. But then perhaps you turn your nose down and the frost slowly dissolves, and then you find your eye goes through the glass and you see everything on the other side, out the window, the trees and the forest and the snow. And so the differentiated world, the world of relativity, reemerges in this realm. But it reemerges in a way where it is not divisible from the vastness of the space, because the space is not a thing that could impede the relative world. And therefore non-duality embraces relativity. And then you enter what is called the mirror-like, or the dream-like, or the illusion-like aftermath samadhi, in which you are, of course, immediately attracted, amongst all the differentiated things in the world, to the living beings among them. Inside and outside are perceived as equal. Self and other are perceived as equal in this illusion-like aftermath. Freedom at the same time as engagement with relativity. You're not stressed out trying to just collapse everything into the absolute, or just resign yourself into just there only being a relative. You're sort of aware of the surface of the mirror, transparency of the void, and the infinite colorfulness and the shape and the beauty of differentiated relativity. You're aware of that simultaneously. So this is a rehearsal of achieving the realization of the freedom from a unity of true self and life. Through exploring that, knowing what kind of self you're looking for clearly from the first key, being aware that you either find it or you don't, and therefore never giving up looking, never finding a sort of not finding. Then being catapulted into a vast space-like experience of the dissolution of subject and object in the vast void, and then seeing the void itself dissolve. This is an initial taste of the wisdom of selflessness. You then go back into business in that session or another, where you then acknowledge that your mind then produces the idea, well, if there's no true unity of self and life systems, maybe the self is something different from the life systems, and there's a true plurality, a multiplicity of them, and the self is something like the owner of the life systems, the harnesser of the life system, the central content of the life systems. Different modes of relationship of this unitive self that you felt was there, and you can remember that you still can feel is there, and then you explore all possible modes of relationship. Then this makes you realize, as you do this specifically, that anything that relates to anything else is affected by the relationship. There is no one-way relationship where an absolute can remain absolute and yet relate to a relative. And by looking at all the life systems and how, the self might be some sort of a shining thing or somewhere outside of the life systems with little silver cord leading down to the life systems, all this kind of mystical type of ideas. A little shining angel flying above with one of those like toy airplane monitors manipulating the system. And when you fail to find any convincing ground for an absolutely real self, then yet being real and solid and absolute and so forth, then you fail to find again the absolute self looking in that way, When you fail to find it, you and the life systems and the sense of environment and everything dissolve. You go back into the space, and then you come back into the illusion like aftermath experience. You have to do it again and again and again, because now that you're in the meditation and the cultivation of transcendent wisdom, now you are going after beginningless instincts that are ingrained in your being, gut feelings that you are real, that you really exist. And this such a powerful gut feeling. It's like the gut feeling that underlies your wish to defend your life against life-threatening attack. And therefore meditation again and again pounds and pulverizes all different varieties of this upwelling gut feelings to transform even the instincts. The deeper you go with this, in the gradual smoothing down of these absolutizing habits, the more and more relational you feel, and the more broadly and vastly connected you feel. So that then compassion orientation and spirit of enlightenment, or relative spirit of enlightenment orientation or compassion orientation, and absolute spirit of enlightenment orientation or wisdom orientation reinforce each other. And even when you're meditating in a formal way, or when you're living in the world and interacting with others, your wisdom is developing. When you're meditating in a formal way, your compassion is developing. Relativity and absolutivity mutually reinforce non-dually. They don't become mutually contradictory. They become mutually complementary. And you become happier and happier, and lighter and opener and opener. This is actually vipassana. Vipassana begins with mindfulness of the body, of the sensations, the mind, and of ideas. They're wieldings of wisdom. And the wieldings of wisdom from basic mindfulness, which sees through the apparent intrinsic reality of every little sensation, of every little thought, of every little identity, manifestation, which is the real meditative path of finding liberation from being just a mechanistic, machine-like being. And then the consummation of the vipassana is when it goes beyond the impermanence, the awareness of the impermanence, and beyond the awareness of the suffering, and comes to the awareness of the selflessness, and penetrates through the deepest core absolutization of identity, and realizes identitylessness, which then, far from crippling a person into feeling that they're nothing, or stuck in the experience of their nothing, makes the person realize the conventionality and the total relativity of their being. And once you realize your total relationality of your being, you then become finally responsible for imagining yourself. There is no seeming concretistic identity, no sort of substantialistic thing that sort of you're stuck with being. You realize that what you imagine is what you are. What the world imagines you to be also is what you are. It's not solipsistic. It's the combined interface of the imaginations of you and all beings. It's what you and what all things are. Emptiness means all things are open to be created into any form, depending on how the beings perceive them, what the beings agree to, how they work together with it. So therefore, emptiness means the potential of not only you being Buddha, but your environment being Buddha. Not only you being Buddha, but others being Buddha. So you begin to take responsibility with the art of developing the Buddha self. of developing that self that interacts with other selves in a totally altruistic way, where its manifestations, even its embodiment ultimately, are only for the benefit of producing happiness in the other self and removing suffering from the other self. Shunyata karuna garbham dong yid ningje ningbojen. Freedom, the womb of compassion. Emptiness, whose essence is compassion. Voidness, the birth of compassion. This remains the most lovely expression in all of the Buddhist literature. Shunyata karuna garbham.
This concludes Session 4 of the Jewel Tree of Tibet with Robert Thurman. Our program continues with Session 5.